ustedes están viendo este video gracias a la ciencia. Siendo tan importante, uno podría pensar, no, pues la sociedad moderna debería conocer qué está pasando en la ciencia, qué es lo último con las investigaciones, quiénes son los científicos y científicas dentro y fuera del país, así como el fútbol. Uno en el fútbol sabe al dedillo qué está pasando, cuáles son los equipos, los movimientos, los jugadores. Mucha gente sabe eso y eso está bien, pero la ciencia también es importante y apuesto que muy pocos saben por qué es importante. Ni idea. Medios de comunicación masivos pues rara vez están interesados en este tema. Es por eso que vamos a entrevistar a Joe Hanson del exitoso canal de YouTube It's Okay to Be Smart. Y Joe, además de ser divulgador de la ciencia, él hizo un doctorado en biología molecular. Pues veamos. I remember that one of the strongest influence for me to start a career in science was Cosmos, Carl Sagan. So I would like to know, do you remember any media that inspired you to become a scientist?
There was definitely many small things, and I think it goes back farther than like those programs like Cosmos, where I was aware of them as an adult. I think it goes back to children's programming. So I watched a ton of Sesame Street on public broadcasting here. I remember one old shot of Sally Ride, the astronaut, being launched for like A is for astronaut up into space with this really cheesy animation. And they would have these little moments where you didn't realize that you were experiencing a science or a nature story on that show there, as a way that you weren't so, it wasn't so in your face. They were getting it in there without telling you that you were experiencing a science story. And I think that was really, really effective to make it interesting and exciting back then.
So you have a scientific background. Sometimes you hear this Sagan effect when Carl Sagan had like a resistance from other colleagues. Do you think that have changed?
I do see that changing in a big way. It definitely is still a real thing in a lot of institutions. Big institutions like universities change very slowly, typically, like if we look back through history. And these are things that I think are such generational shifts in perspective. It's very hard to change that system when it's still constructed the same way, when the same people are still running it. But as we see this new generation of young researchers entering the ranks and becoming young professors, and they're bringing their own values with them, and they understand why it's important. And so the biggest energy that I see in how this is changing is coming from those people, that many of them themselves are doing the science communication. You know, they see the value. They realize there's nobody in between them and the public. So why not do it? You know, that has reached into things from open access publication all the way to preprint science communication, things that would have been terrifying for people even just 5 or 6 years ago. These things are really starting to change fast. And it's one thing for the change of people's minds, but the institutions are catching up. And so you see more and more universities establishing science communication training programs and support programs. You see funding agencies beginning to give money and actually make it part of their granting cycle, that they really want to see these impacts being delivered to the people who are, you know, to the public who's funding this science. So it's been really exciting to see this change, and I think it's happening much faster than I expected.
In your opinion, are there any advantages of scientists communicating science instead of science journalists, for example?
You know, there certainly can be. I mean, there's so many different kinds of science journalists. There's good ones and there's bad ones. You know, it's a thing, an art form to learn like any other. Certainly, no one knows the work better than the scientist, and no one prevents scientists from delivering their own work to the public. I think there are definite advantages to having journalists. They serve a really important role in putting your work in context in the larger scope of the science, to being critical of it, and questioning things about your research and how it fits in to the larger body of work, and oftentimes finding weaknesses and allowing the greater scientific community. It's a kind of a journalistic peer review. When you see a well-written article or a video piece about something, you know, those things are given time, just to say, to keep reminding the greater public of what we all know, which is that, you know, this is never done. It's never perfect. It's never airtight. We're always just refining this knowledge. So that's a really important service that journalists provide. But again, scientists do know their work better than anyone. They are the passion behind it. No one can replace that delivery of that emotion and what drives you. And it's also such a great help to get representation of all of the different kinds of people who are doing this work out there. If you're depending on a dozen different publications to do all the work for all the scientists in the world, there are so many people who you'll never hear from. But when you open Twitter and you can see the faces and backgrounds and nationalities of so many different kinds of scientists, that's something that a few publications and journalists could never do for the scientific community.
Wow, yeah, both are important then. What has been the hardest topic to communicate for you? Any topic like you say, like, wow, this is so... I don't know if...
Well, there are the obvious big ones, like climate change and evolution. Yeah, right. But there are some really surprising ones. I've done a couple of videos about the Egyptian pyramids, just because I'm fascinated by, ancient technology and the ability of people long before us to figure out very complex things. An unreal amount of resistance to this idea. They didn't have, zero or mathematics. People just refused to believe that it could have been figured out in a time before now. And it really makes me ask why. But I was certainly surprised by how difficult it is to just make a video about how we think they were built at the level of climate change resistance. Things like vaccines and climate change and evolution are always difficult because the resistance to these ideas is not factual, it's not logical typically. It's usually based in identity and emotion and very social kind of things. And we can't replace, a colleague of mine, Liz Neely, has this quote about, we can't replace a feeling with a fact. And so you have to remember that. It's really difficult to change people's feelings with facts. So that's why I love doing stories the way that I do, is because I'm able to also use feelings alongside my facts.
Anécdotas científicas.
As we're talking next week, I have a really huge set of videos coming out about the monarch butterfly migration, telling that story. We were down in Mexico. We got to be in the forest and underneath them and kind of tracing this whole amazing event in nature. And something that people will never see that happens behind the scenes. These are these very mountainous forests, very steep ravines. We set up a tripod and a camera so that these butterflies could fly past and you could feel the environment and everything like that. And then halfway through shooting, the tripod fell over and our camera fell down this like 100-foot ravine into the bottom.
Did you lose the camera?
Like cartoon characters. We didn't lose the camera. We went down and got it, but we scratched it up pretty good. But you'll never see that. But things like this happening behind the scenes, we're just sitting there kind of like half crying, half laughing. Like, wouldn't it be, the camera wasn't on, otherwise we would have definitely published that. But it's people always see these finished products and these perfect stories, and knowing that we're not perfect either behind the scenes, and we definitely mess up and funny things happen while we're trying to capture these things.
Joe, muchas gracias por haber participado en Ciencia Café.
Ciencia para Sumercé.
Si quieres ser notificado cuando salga un video nuevo, suscríbete a nuestro canal oprimiendo el botón rojo y después la campanita.